must understand that there will be criminal justice consequences. Since the last public meeting of the Policing Board, there have been a number of deplorable race hate crimes that you refer to in your remarks, Chair. I want communities and Policing Board members to be assured just how seriously we take this issue of hate crime and tackling it. Assistant Chief Constable Stephen Martin is the senior officer responsible for overseeing our response to those corrosive crimes, and I know that he'll be glad to answer any questions that the Board might have on this work that he is leading on. The Deputy Chief Constable has designated hate crime as a strategic priority for the service. On average, PSNI deal with a hate-motivated call for service every 3 hours. Another of our strategic priorities is domestic abuse. My officers respond to a domestic abuse incident every 19 minutes on average. In both of these crimes, victims are vulnerable and our work doesn't stop after attending the incident. For example, we participate in over 1,600 multi-agency risk assessment conferences relating to domestic abuse each year. The Policing Board recently received a presentation from Will Kerr on the issue of cybercrime. This is an area of increasing demand. Last week alone, for example, we received 42 calls for service on Facebook. Individuals and businesses in Northern Ireland who have become the victims of a cyber attack are often just one footprint in what turns out to be a much larger, more complex international criminal investigation. These investigations require extremely close working with international partners and in some cases the formation of joint investigation teams, with PSNI officers working as part of an international team to make sure that victims are kept safe and offenders are identified and brought to justice. We have recently established a cybercrime centre to deal with these increasingly lengthy and complex investigations. From the first day that you appointed me as Chief Constable, I have made the point that the demands to which we respond are changing and increasing in complexity. We deal with everything from abandoned motor vehicles through to international criminal gangs who traffic human beings within our community. We strive not only to deliver visible neighbourhood policing, but also to protect the vulnerable behind closed doors from offences such as domestic abuse and child abuse. New crime types such as the cybercrime and financial crime are emerging and changing all the time, and we need to be flexible to deal with that. These are duties expected, of course, of any police service across these islands, but policing Northern Ireland's post-conflict society goes much wider than that. As I've already mentioned at the start, there is a small number, but dangerous number of violent, dissident Republicans who continue to plan attacks on police and pose a real threat to our communities. We also have to deal with the daily requirements of responding to interface tensions, the significant costs of preventing and responding to serious public order resulting from increased community tensions, as well as our legal obligations in dealing with the past. We are responding to all of these demands during a time of rapidly shrinking budgets and declining numbers of police officers and staff. So like all other public services, policing is changing. Keeping people safe by policing with the community remains our core purpose. That is not going to change. Just because our budgets and human resources reduce, it is all the more necessary that we prioritise our increasingly finite resources in a way that we have not had to do so before. This is a trend that is going to continue into the foreseeable future. We have an average of 1,340 calls for service every 24 hours. It is simply not possible for us to be everywhere at once. We have to prioritise all this demand according to levels of threat, harm, risk and vulnerability. I believe that the community we serve will support us in prioritising our resources to protect the most vulnerable when they need it most. If there is a risk to life or an emergency, we will be there for people. We will continue to protect the community from the most serious threats presented by organised crime or paramilitarism and those who exploit vulnerable people. Those who do harm to others will continue to be investigated and put before the courts. This includes crimes such as hate crime and domestic abuse, violent sexual offences and child sexual exploitation. But in order to prioritise these areas of high risk, there is something that is going to have to give somewhere else. Depending on the level of demand at the time that the call is received, a report of fly tipping or a noisy party or a stolen bicycle may not receive the same response as a call about a domestic abuse incident, for example. I think people understand that. It's already the case that calls from the community that are not an emergency are being dealt with in slower time through use of scheduled appointments, and where possible and where it's appropriate, other calls are actually being resolved over the telephone. We're having to prioritise at the less visible end of policing, where public protection work, including child sexual exploitation, must balance against the other demands, including firearms licensing, the resourcing of reviewing and investigating the serious harm investigations in the present. We need to balance that against the resources used for reviewing and investigating serious harm of the past. Every choice we make has a consequence. If we put resource into one area of policing, we must take it from another. Given the significant pressures we face in the years ahead, I believe the public need to be involved in an ongoing conversation about how we deliver our service to the community. I know this is a view shared and supported by you as members of the Policing Board. I want to be open and honest with the public about how policing is changing, and I know that through the Policing Board and the PCSPs, the community will continue to have an opportunity to understand that and to help shape policing priorities. As part of our commitment to an ongoing conversation with the public, on Friday the 17th of April, we undertook a 24-hour insight to policing via social media, via Twitter. We're following that event today by publishing the PSNI's demand wheel, as we've called it. That's a visual map of demand across an average 24 hours of delivering policing in Northern Ireland. Our aim with both of these concepts has been to highlight the breadth and depth of the demand that PSNI faces on a daily basis. It is important that the public understand that the challenges that police officers and staff face are much more than incidents that hit the news headlines. The Twitter events and the demand wheel also illustrate that demand on policing is far broader than what is recorded in the main performance statistics. Police recorded crime only represents part of the police workload. While it presents an indication of some of the reactive demands to which we respond, there are many types of work, both reactive and proactive, that we undertake both as a statutory duty or by common convention, which do not feature as reports of crime. As was illustrated by the Twitter event, every day and every night, officers are looking after the most vulnerable in society in a way that is little understood and little appreciated. Some of the examples included between midnight and 4 a.m., for example, on the 18th of April, officers were dealing with 7 incidents relating to individuals who said they had suicidal thoughts. During the same period, colleagues were dealing with 12 missing persons, 9 of whom we located within a 4-hour period. Around the same time, officers elsewhere were tending to an elderly female who had activated her personal alarm. Another colleague was speaking to social services to provide assistance to a mother and her very young baby who were vulnerable. None of these examples are reflected anywhere in our performance statistics. It is also the case that while police officers will always help when we can, we're not always the best service or support the needs of the vulnerable person best. I've spoken to board members on many occasions about the need to improve partnership working, encouraging teams of professionals from different backgrounds to work together to solve the problem rather than just react to the symptoms. One example of where collaborative working is delivering real results that keep people safe is in reducing offending in partnership model. This includes over 58 stakeholders, both statutory and non-statutory. There are 10 reducing offending units across Northern Ireland, with over 350 offenders and 60 risk of serious harm cases being managed. This approach delivers real financial advantages, with current estimates indicating that the programme has saved wider society over £3 million since its inception. Across public, private and voluntary sectors, we need to be more innovative about how we can work together with other agencies and groups to support the safety and well-being of our community. Chair, understanding the breadth and depth and complexity of demand on policing is incredibly important as we look to the future. The reality is that public service delivery, including police service delivery, will be very different in the years ahead. With rapidly shrinking financial resources and declining human resources, we have to prioritise our service delivery in a way that we have not had to do before. It is therefore incredibly important that through you as the board and PCSPs, that we can ensure that the community continue to shape our policing priorities. Thank you, Chair, and I hand back to you for questions.
Thank you for that report, Councillor Mendes. The presentation that we had in the private session, I think, very clearly showed us how demand has changed and what the demand is. And maybe there are areas of demand that we probably weren't so sure of, so no doubt the public aren't either, and we do need to get that message out. So I'm going to move directly to questions, and the Dolores Kelly has a question on this.
Chief Constable, I know that a rise in reporting is to be welcomed, but I think we need to hear about the police response, and I recognise it's more than a police response is required. I also am interested in your opening remarks, where you highlighted a number of the difficulties that police face in policeman divided society, and I wonder, have police ever looked at how that has been costed to the organisation?
Yes, well, there's two questions wrapped up in one there. The cost of policing a violent society. I've commissioned some work on that. That is highly complex, but it's using the technology that we've introduced over the last 3 or 4 years. We introduced the technology largely to be using our resources in a more intelligent and a directed way. So Locate, for example, which tells us where each police vehicle is at one time and whether or not it's in the hotspots and the areas where we need it to be. The command and control system and other systems are coming together under work that Stephen's leading on, so that we will be able to not just use that for tasking purposes, which is largely its original intention, but actually bring the data, the rich data from these various systems together so that we can actually understand the costs and the demand better. So that work's ongoing. I would be happy to have that presented to the board, either to all the committees or to the full board when it's complete. But we think that if we're going to have to move forward with less money, stop doing certain things, we need to make sure that our house is in order and that we fully understand the demand. The costs of dividing policing a violent society, we estimate that the additionality that's required to police this jurisdiction, we consider to be about 30% of the budget. Now, there's some science behind that and there's research behind it. David Best led on that work in 2013. This work that Stephen's doing, along with colleagues from finance, will validate, verify that, will challenge that figure, but we anticipate that we'll have a strong evidence base to give you a very specific percentage. On the race gate issue, Stephen will talk perhaps with some of what we're doing about all of that. The only point that I would make, and it's important to remember the context, through various inspections and scrutiny, some of which given this board of thematic inspections into hate crime, through our own engagement with NGOs, we learned and we were convinced that hate crime was hugely underreported. Right across all the strands of hate crime, there was a lack of confidence in policing, or whatever it was that resulted in underreporting. So, you know, we have on race hate crime, for example, last year a 31% increase. Now, the actual raw numbers are not as startling as the percentage figure, but that 31% increase for us is both a positive thing in that we have put a number of initiatives in place that increase confidence in reporting, so we take some comfort from that, but it's also a challenge. I mean, clearly, for any crime type to increase by a third, then you'd expect senior police officers to be saying, what we're doing with this. And that's a difficult bit, and that's why Stephen Martin's going to answer that bit.
Yeah, well, I would just endorse what the Chief has said, that obviously the increase is both a matter of challenge and concern, but given the historic difficulties with underreporting, it can be a positive indicator of increased confidence. So in one sense it's concern, but in the other sense, if people are coming forward and reporting, that's a very positive development. Following the significant increase in hate crime in the first quarter of 2014, we took immediate action. It was actually under NCC Care, and we launched an operation called Reiner, and it was quite a public operation to provide a coordinated response to the problem of hate crime. The aims of Reiner were to pursue all investigative lines of inquiry, give a further level of rigour to the current investigations that were ongoing, and to ensure that we were addressing the police response to racist hate crime effectively. We also created the Specialised Non-Emergency Number 101 Option 2, which allowed it much easier for people to report hate crime. This offers a function to translate calls into up to 50 languages, and since its launch, 301 hate crime related calls have been received using 101 Option 2. In November 2014, we introduced a new management structure for hate crime, and the Deputy Chief Constable appointed me as what we call the gold commander for hate crime, to try and take a cross-organisational look at it. I have a silver commander who works with me, Superintendent Paula Hillman, who's based in Belfast. And at that same time, the Deputy directed that hate crime become a service operational priority, and it has remained as such. So our work in the group has focused on a range of things. One is investigative standards, also intelligence development around hate crime, our engagement both with victims and the groups and underrepresented groups within our society, training of officers, our actual policy about how we conduct ourselves and our own policy around hate crime, and both our internal and external communications. We've also seen some development of our IT performance systems, which assists operational commanders in measuring driving performance around things like 10-day updates to victims. And a review of our practices is now ongoing again to ensure that the changes which I previously briefed the board around district policing are learning and dealing with the recommendations in the various audit and inspection reports that the Chief Constable referred to. Each of the new district commanders, the 11 district commanders, have been asked to appoint a champion within their own senior management teams for hate crime, and these officers will have responsibility for monitoring performance in relation to hate crime incidents and outcomes, and further developing local engagement structures with ethnic minority groups and support organisations within the various districts. We fully recognise, and we've seen it very recently, just even since the last board meeting in recent weeks, particularly various attacks in the Vernon area and Polish homes. We've had the Lithuanian nail bar and beauty salon attack. Again, Polish people working there, and there have been some graffiti indicating that they were the target of that attack. So we know the devastating impact, and we want victims to have confidence that the police will do everything possible to investigate these crimes and bring people before the court. Our role is to keep people safe, and where offences have been committed, to carry out a full and thorough investigation that is victim-centred and brings offenders to justice. And since the 1st of November, I can tell you that 63 people have been arrested across Northern Ireland for racist hate crimes. Engagement is very important. It continues day to day both at the operational level within districts, between policing teams, communities and vulnerable groups, but also indeed at the strategic level. And myself, I've spoken at events at Skainos, I've spoken at events at City Hall, and I've engaged with the Honorary Police Consul, Jerome Mullen, and I know that the Police Ambassador is coming to Northern Ireland and will be meeting the Chief Constable and myself in coming days. But as always, that's what the police do, and we take it seriously, but the long-term solution to hate crime is a much wider societal problem, and the solution lies in a multi-agency response from everybody, from policing, yes, but elected representatives and broader civic society to ensure that the root cause of hate crime is effectively tackled. And as I've said in the media, I think it behoves all of us in Northern Ireland to make sure that people who quite properly come here, have a right to come here, who choose to come here to live, to work, to contribute to society from other countries and other cultures, and to add value to us, feel reassured, feel protected and feel welcome.
Even though it's taken a lot of time to collect this, but it is an important one, and I have supplementary. So,
thanks, Chair. Chief Constable, can I just return to the first question that Dolores asked around the 30% of policing resources dedicated to issues such as public disorder, counter-terrorism and legacy issues, which you highlighted. And I'm wondering, as we're planning for the 16-19 policing plan, 3-year plan, can you talk to us about ways that those policing priorities can be included in the plan? And even, can I ask, are those policing priorities included in the demand week?
That's the second bit. Yes, they are included in the demand week. We've had discussions between us as a senior team and the board around these big areas of police activity that tend not to get reflected in the policing plan. We're happy to continue those conversations. I haven't sensed either any resistance from the board or from the police service about building that 30% of costs in, but there is something about trying to reflect in the plan that, I suppose officially it's your plan and you kindly build it in collaboration with us, which is a sensible thing to do. There is something about trying to reflect what communities' expectations are. A large part of that 30%, and we get the figure validated through this work that Stephen's leading on, but a large part of that 30% is created by vacuums and tensions that arise in communities that the police need to respond to because of shortcomings, if I can call it that, or vacuums created somewhere else. We're in a post-conflict society. There's a lack of consensus around issues like parading and other issues. There's a big legacy piece that we've talked about at this board many times. How we go about quantifying that and putting that into some sort of a target or a performance measure is going to be hugely challenging. It's not bean counting stuff. It's going to be more qualitative than quantitative. Happy to engage with the board around it. We're not trying to discourage you from going there, but I think there's been a recognition to board officials and with members in the past as we've struggled with this, about how we would actually do it.
okay, thank you. Do you want to?
Yeah, sorry, Chief Constable, maybe just give a slight supplement to that, and apologies for broadening it out a little bit, but obviously one of your most important and critical resources is your people, it's your officers on the ground. And I'm wondering in that context, can you just update us as to, on average, how many officers you currently have per day of sick civil services?
It's obviously the number varies, but it would be in around the 400 mark most days, sickness absence. That's partly into duty, but other issues as well. And of course, sorry, Chair, the thing to note is we're working very hard under the Deputy Chief Constable's leadership on the target that you've given us in this plan to reduce police officer sickness by 25% in this year. So we're working hard at that. It's going to need radical measures. We'll be looking for your support because we're going to have to probably have some changes around policy and how all of that happens. We we are going to do this just by tinkering around the edges. There'll be some innovation and radical steps needed to drive that sickness level down. And of course, we're not qualified to comment on how genuine people's conditions are. We just simply have to try to support our staff, look after them, and encourage them back to work.
Thank you. Jonathan Craig.
Thanks, Chief. Unfortunately, over the past few months, we've had a couple of sort of high-profile incidents where some of your officers seemed, when I say seemed, already with the full fact, but they seemed to fail to follow up on evidence that had been handed in by the public. Now, considering that, you talked about partnership here from start to finish, one of the biggest partnerships would be with the general public and yourselves. And we need the public to hand information in to help you find convictions. What action are you going to take to ensure that there's no repeat of such incidents?
Well, Mark will answer the detail of the question, but one of these is one too many. But unfortunately, when it goes wrong, it makes a headline, and I think members appreciated the simplicity and the power of the demand wheel that we shared with you in the private session that showed that on an average day we could 1,400 incidents to respond to. So I'm not making excuses, so we're not complacent. Mark will tell you what we're doing about this specific question, but actually the vast majority of our officers do a really good job when they're responding to calls for service from members of the public. But with that context, Mark will answer the question.
Well, yes, I suppose the context is against 1,338 calls a day for assistance, and but the reputation of the service can turn on the activities of one single officer. This is what we say to every student officer when they're first recruited into the service. As I said at the beginning of this week, that the individual actions paint the picture for the whole organisation. I think the difficulty of this question, Jonathan, is that without getting into the specifics of those examples that you raised, the Code of Ethics is very clear about this investigation, is very clear about professional duty. The relationship with the Ombudsman in terms of dealing with external complaints is very clear. And I also have a very active discipline and anti-corruption branch who deal with serious disciplinary matters in the service, and unfortunately we're fairly busy. Now, equally, there's also a role here for local supervision and local management, for local managers to take appropriate management action whenever they feel that the officers aren't performing to the full duties. There's a whole range of things that go on a daily basis. The training, the issues that you've raised shouldn't happen. So there's no sort of single systemic issue in the organisation. Officers are trained to the right level, they know what they're meant to do. So quite often it's about dealing with the actions of an individual officer as opposed to some sort of broad problem in the organisation. And certainly in these examples that you've raised, we haven't identified that there's a broad systemic problem in the organisation. The vast majority of officers, most of the time, do their work extremely well. And even those who occasionally do it wrong do most of the work, most of the time, very, very well. It's just that it's very high profile. But there's a whole range of between ourselves and the Ombudsman and discipline branches and local management to deal with these issues. I think it would be really tempting just to rush to sort of another training solution to this or something else, but it's not really to happen. But I think I'll finish on this. I would be very confident that in these islands, probably in the whole of Europe, that police discipline is most robustly dealt with the PSNI compared to any other police service. And the police officers, they are more accountable, more visible, and more transparent for the reasons than anywhere else.
Thank you, Chair. With regard to that, Mark, I don't disagree with you, and I don't think this is a training issue. I think this is an issue of probably local management, if the truth be told. Because no one knows their own individual officers better than their own sergeant or inspector, for that matter. And I think you can give us assurances that in those specific cases where this unfortunately was highlighted, that the appropriate actions are being taken.
Yeah.
This was a particular issue around the Armagh district where there had been some damage to property and the people had been told by the police that despite the fact that having some partial fingerprint and DNA, that it will be pursued, and as you said earlier, keeping people safe. I said that against the answer I received in relation to the cost of the very elite group within our society of the close protection units, which is costing almost £12 million this year, against the ordinary Joe Soap who doesn't feel that they're getting the service. So perhaps you might like to make clear to the public just what difficulties there are within resourcing and investigation of what people believe to be quite severe crimes against themselves and their property.
Well, the reality is, as the Chief has outlined, we're now having to grade our response in different ways. But I think the thing for us to recognise is no matter where you're graded in that response, it means an awful lot to you. So the impact of each individual victim of crime, whether serious or not so serious in our description, is huge upon them. There are no doubt that in terms of resourcing, there are every day, all the colleagues on the table from each of the departments, there are extreme demands. You mentioned the close protection unit, which places of extreme demand on our organisation to provide protective duties to keep people in our society, and that does move people from other areas of business on a daily basis. And those are part of the to some of the unresolved issues in our society.
Richard, I had understood that there are cases where there are officers in districts will make a judgment call as to the sort of the cost benefit analysis, almost a likelihood of a prosecution in relation to the further investigation of what may have been small scale crimes.
Well, perhaps afterwards I get the details of that, and then I can look at the specific incident and see if it's systematic or some other issue around just access to forensic services and investigation of these crimes.
Thank you. Pat Sheehan.
Chief Constable, I want to ask you a question around your obligations under Section 55(2) of the Police Act. And that, of course, is your obligation to refer to the Ombudsman any matter that would indicate the conduct of a member of the police has resulted in the death of any other person. Given that most referrals from the HEP appear to have involved direct action by a police officer, does that indicate that the PSNI doesn't think they have an obligation where the cause of death was more indirect? And I'm talking specifically about, for example, failing to give a warning to individuals where there has been a credible threat, or through failings of handling of agents, or CHIS as they're called today.
We will interpret our Section 55 duties very broadly, and sense that we don't necessarily narrow it just down to direct involvement. So on a daily basis, for current stuff, things that you mentioned would be things that we would actively consider referring to the Ombudsman if that occurred. Where the HET work has been concerned, I can't give you a categorical assurance that was the case. I would suspect that it hasn't been. The HET was, to a degree, at arm's length from the rest of the operation of the organisation. Their referrals to the Ombudsman were not made directly through PSD or via the Deputy Chief Constable's Office, which is the proper mechanism for doing it. They referred directly to the Ombudsman's Office, which is something I picked up on with the Deputy last year. I have spoken to the Legacy Investigation Branch recently, this week on this matter, to make sure that all referrals do go through. I think, though, Pat, there's a valid question in there about what assessment is made as they go through the files. We are involved on our live cases with a closer conversation with the Ombudsman around broader public interest. So you can define 55(2) quite narrowly, or you can move it across into the broader public interest of 55(5) referral to the Ombudsman because it's in the interests of the public that it happens. And I would concede that probably needs to be more deeply considered than has to around the legacy cases. I'm very, very confident that it's very actively considered. I think this is by all the chief operators, myself and Mr. Harris, who I think this week I think I've seen 2 55(5) referrals to the Ombudsman. But where the HET is concerned, there was no kind of central understanding on how to do that.
And I suppose just for the record then, Mark, are you aware of any cases that have been referred to the Ombudsman that have resulted from a failing to give warnings to individuals or where there have been mishandling of agents?
I am not personally aware of that. My belief would be that most of the referrals have been where there was an officer directly involved in perhaps the death of the person who was starting the farm, or what was that, passing blood or something else. And something in that arena, I believe most of the cases would have been referred. But I couldn't guarantee, I couldn't give you a definitive answer. Maybe the deputy does.
I can answer that in the affirmative in circumstances close to what you described, and I've made those referrals whilst in the role of ACC crime operations, and they were made in the normal manner through the deputy chief constable.
Thank you. Brian Ray.
Thank you very much, Chair. And Chief Constable, thank you for the answer that I got to my question, or to the Performance Committee's question on road deaths this year to date. However, I think I would like, for the benefit of the public, just a bit of elaboration on some of the answers that were given, particularly to the fourth answer, where we asked, can you assure the board and the general public that the decision to amalgamate traffic branch with the Armed Response Unit, which was done due to budgetary pressures, has not adversely impacted upon the policing of and safety on Northern Ireland's roads? And bearing in mind we wake up almost, well, probably once a week on a number of occasions to the rather tragic news that yet another person has lost his or her life on the roads. And no longer ago than this morning, whenever a 17-year-old was being killed in the motorway.
Well, Alan Todd leads on road policing issues and our response. I have said that these structures and the police service is going to have to look differently as we reconfigure and become more efficient. Some of that is about taking out duplication, some of it is about taking out layers of management that can be done on a better span of control, just to be more economic and more efficient. But I've also said that we will prioritise based on threat, risk and harm, and given, Brian, the numbers of people who die on our roads, then clearly that pushes it up the prioritisation mechanisms for it. There are other fundamental questions to ask in terms of evidence-based policing about what is the best way to tackle road casualties, road deaths in particular, and growing or reducing the size of road policing teams, for example. There's not a strong body of evidence about that. We need to do some further work around that. But on the specifics of the amalgamation and our current attempt to stem the increase in the number of road deaths, some commentary to help.
Thanks, Chief. Thank you, Brian. As you said, I provided a written answer, and as you also said, as recently as late evening yesterday, we lost another person to the roads, bringing the total for this year for 22. We were in a more fortunate position at this last board meeting that actually the number of deaths on our roads in comparison to last year were down, but it shows you how quickly things can change, and actually we're back in the par to be slightly ahead of where we were last year. This reflects both a national and indeed a Western Europe trend, with falling insurance prices on cars, increased finance deals, and reduction cost of fuel, leading to more journeys and more mileage on our road with younger drivers. And all those big factors behind it right across the UK and Europe are leading to a reversal of the trend, the good trend we've seen in recent years. And unfortunately, the increased number of families who are getting the worst possible business in the police, often late in the evening. You touched particularly around the amalgamation of roads policing and armed support unit. That was done in terms of managerial and locational piece to make sure that we were absolutely making sure that we were making the best use of the resources available to us. But it would be wrong of me to focus entirely on that piece, because if I don't remind you, Stephen will, actually the vast majority of roads policing detections are actually carried out by district personnel, and it's the more specialist work that roads policing do. Their work is currently part of the Operations Support Department review, and the debate to which the Chief refers is one we're having as a team as to the way forward with this. But that is a specialist skill set we require. It is one that we've retained. And actually what we're doing as a department is making sure that all the skills across the department are able to be moved and support each other as befits the needs of the time. So at times of the year, day and indeed week, when tactical support groups aren't working to full capacity, or our response aren't working to full capacity, or indeed the close protection teams aren't working to full capacity, as was the case last summer, they are then put and focused towards keeping people safe on our roads. And that approach forms the basis for how we're taking forward the review. But the special skill set is required going forward. Last night's a particularly good example, and it feeds into the conversation Chris was leading earlier on demand. People think that a road traffic collision occurred at 10 to 11 last night. By 10 past 11, we had the motorway closed to traffic and traffic diverted, because that's the first piece, that in a really critical and difficult situation doesn't become worse for a high volume of traffic travelling at speed. And the ability to do that quickly requires people who are trained, confident, knowing what they're doing, that calls road policing officers. That's then supported by a wide range of officers and staff from across the service. We have a helicopter immediately deployed to make sure that the one person has been found on the motorway, that there aren't more people using the cameras that have actually been ejected from the vehicle elsewhere along the route. And then specialist investigators, forensic, family liaison officers, and all the machinery that comes in behind that, and indeed working with partners across the service to make sure the motorway can be opened in time for people trying to get to their work this morning. That is a huge and costly multi-agency approach, one we thank our partners for, and one which we require the skill set of road policing to continue to deliver. But the key message that must go forward from meetings like this, Brian, is that the vast majority of collisions are avoidable. We know what causes the collisions, and we have a responsibility as a police service to continue to our enforcement role to bear down on those things that create those difficulties. And in the first quarter, I've written to the board saying we have detected 2,085 speeding offences in the first quarter of this year, a further 2,011 for dangerous or careless driving, 1,581 people for using a mobile phone whilst driving, 1,249 for driving without insurance, and 404 car occupants not wearing their seatbelts. This is in addition to substantial number of drinking and drug driving related offences as well. So we continue both in Stevens, People and District Policing, the roads policing, in the work that we're doing. But there is no getting away from our other partners are under the same pressures we are. Budgets for road safety education are under severe pressure and a small shadow of what they were 2 or 3 years ago. And that is making it hard to maintain the education and awareness piece of this. The road safe road shows, the bike safe programs are all under similar financial pressure. And our patrol hours as a service are down equivalent to 300,000 hours per year. That reduces the number of police officers patrolling the roads and makes our job harder. And that's why the call has to go out to the public to help us help them be safe drivers.
Thank you for that further information. Thank you, Chair.
Ryan, do you have a supplementary?
Yeah, thanks, Chair. I think Alan has highlighted the issue here, where we had a situation that we were at a peak in terms of road death 5 or 6 years ago, and a significant cross-departmental campaign was put in place. And I was openly praising the PS, and I think, George, it was you at the time when you were Assistant Chief Constable, and the work that was carried out, because I saw it firsthand in terms of the impact it was having, and we saw the reduction in road death through a very joined-up approach right across the government sector. We now face budget cuts and road deaths are on the rise again. So clearly we know what the problem is and we know what the solution is. We just need to find a way of trying to bridge that gap. And I don't know, Chair, whether advocating with the Chief Constable, the political parties, the Minister for Justice, the Minister for the Environment, we really need to look at trying to get ourselves back to the successful strategy that was cross-governmental back in 2010 right the way through to 2013, because budget cuts have influenced the road death number. That's very clear in terms of we're not getting people educated here. So I don't know if we can try and do something jointly here to try and get this issue back on the agenda again. I do think now it's come to the stage, particularly with the events of this weekend, that if we don't address this soon, it'll be criminal on our part not to have stood up and tried to address this and try and get back to the very successful campaign we have in place. So I'm maybe not expecting a comment or an answer, George, but I think what we need to do is look at how we try and advocate to the executive that we need that funding put back in place.
Thank you.
I'd just like to say, Chair, we continue to do the work through the ministerial cross-departmental road safety group, and that point isn't lost on any of us, Ryan. And actually, we're trying to exploit the opportunity to reduce budgets for better working across the departments and a removal of the duplication and more shared effort. But I think the best we can expect in the current pressures is that we sort of get a status quo or actually reduce our losses, because actually getting it to move forward is incredibly difficult when resourcing them.
Just a quick comment, like, Chair, and with respect to everybody, the status quo is not working here. We've had a situation over the weekend which just typifies where we're at in terms of road safety, and we can't let this continue. We have to take direct action. This is not a political issue, this is a civic issue, and I think that we as a board, along with the PSNI executive team, should be proactive here, and we should be making approaches to the ministers responsible and saying, here's the evidence when you cut budgets around road traffic safety and education. Now we need to try and fill the gap here. So I think this is where we should be progressive as a board and an executive team and stepping up to the mark and making that move.
Brian Roundtree.
Thank you, Chair. I think support with Ryan and Brian just said in terms of road deaths, and this is tragedy. One death too many on the road. Maybe, Alan, you'd like to outline for us any cooperation you have with Garda Síochána in relation to roads policing, particularly in border areas, particularly those who frequently border roads, difficult roads, but also the main M1 and the A1 and the volume of traffic that has increased substantially over the last number of years on that road.
Happy to, Brian. There's been many years of cooperation between ourselves and Garda Síochána in cross-border road safety. I know people think about that in terms a lot with the cross-border motorway, the M1, but actually all the statistics will show that motorways are by far the safest part of our roads, notwithstanding yesterday evening, which was a tragic set of circumstances of a particular nature, which I don't want to comment further on because they're still under investigation. But as recently as a short number of weeks ago, I was out with roads policing personnel on the Bruncanna Road with Garda Síochána right on the border, seeing firsthand and meeting the officers firsthand who do that work day and daily. So it's the one place I can get 100% reassurance about the closeness of that work right along the border, particularly on the rural roads, joint operations, good daily cooperation, and everything that you could wish for. And that's true of roads policing as it is in the wider cross-border work that Stephen Martin sponsors that he was involved in yesterday.
And just on the back of that, Chair, given what Ryan said about a sustained campaign, there is merit in having a joint campaign because I know from the road in Uri, there's been a number of fatalities that involve southern drivers and families buried both sides of the border as a consequence of fatalities. So I think we need to get the message out, a plural message about driving, and maybe there's something in terms of sharing the cost, but also maximising the benefit for those who drive on that road.
Chair, it just might be worth hearing a very brief update from Stephen Martin, who co-chaired an event in Dundalk on Tuesday, yesterday, which road policing was part of it, along with rural crime, ourselves and Garda Síochána.
Yes, yesterday in Dundalk, myself and my counterpart, the Assistant Commissioner Kieran Kenny, who is the AC for Northern Region, it covers all the counties on the southern side of our border, co-hosted an event where various commanders from PSNI met with their counterparts in Garda Síochána. We talked about a range of issues, ranging from obviously the security threat, organised criminality, theft of livestock, fuel laundering, but both the superintendent in charge of the regional roads policing unit in the Republic and our own Chief Inspector, Diane Pennington, did actually a joint presentation where they talked about the work that they have been doing together, and they have lots of joint operations on either side of the border. We talked about even the development of the interoperability between the radio systems and the other systems that are bespoke to roads policing. So I think it's a very encouraging message that we can give you around our partnership in Garda Síochána. I know that the cross-border policing strategy is being refreshed, and we hope to have good news about that in the coming months. So that relationship goes from strength to strength. And the important thing was, obviously, you know well that we've had a new batch of district commanders recently. So that was new commanders with new command teams in the north, meeting their counterparts in the Republic and building those relationships with the purpose of working better together in the border area to keep people safe and keep communities safe, not least of all, Brian, in relation to the roads.
Thank you.
Yeah, just a quick supplementary, and I would commend Steve and the team and all of that. I think that's good work. And I want to make it clear there's no criticism here in terms of road safety because this is a problem we all have to face. But perhaps maybe, Chair, could I ask that maybe yourself and the Chief Constable have a discussion about pulling together an event, maybe at the board, and having people around the table under Alan's lead to maybe look at how we try and expedite some of the issues that seem to have arisen, particularly when we are at a, if you like, a glut in terms of road death over the last number of months.
Thank you. Lord?
Chief, my questions around the threats from the so-called UDA in North Antrim. I think the criminal gang and drug dealers would probably be a more apt description. But in terms of a response to their threats and to provide reassurance to the communities living in that area, what can you say? And are there any ramifications for any of those who are out on licence? And will there be any review of their ceasefire? I know it's the ceasefire review is not to yourselves, but also you provide intelligence to the NIO.
Yes, happy to give you an update on that. I've said many times the policing purpose is very simple, is to keep people safe. That means that we prevent harm, we protect people, and we bring offenders to justice. Or we lock up bad people. These are bad people, and we will do everything within the law to make their life as unashamedly difficult as possible, because they're wreaking havoc and fear in communities, and we are going to use the resources available to us to protect people, prevent harm, bring them to justice. Steve will give you the detailed answer.
Yes, Dolores, we saw yesterday's article in the Irish News. We treat the issue very, very seriously. This is clearly a dangerous group. We saw the murder of Mr. Mark O'Hagan in January, and since then there have been a number of other brutal shootings and assaults up in the North Antrim area. I have spoken to this board on a number of occasions about the phenomenon of power mafia assaults and shootings, and I don't intend to reverse that. We do know that often this type of activity is about trying to control communities and gain influence. But I also think in this case that there is a leadership issue going on within the UDA in North Antrim, and that a number of individuals are trying to demonstrate their so-called strength and trying to seize the leadership. I want to reassure, which was the thrust of your question, we have a specific operation in place in relation to the events of recent months. That's been going for some weeks now. It is led by Chief Superintendent Murray, who is been appointed as what we call the Gold Commander, the Strategic Commander in relation to that operation. It involves district officers and staff. It involves Will's colleagues, both on the C3 intelligence side and the C2 and C1 investigation side, and the colleagues from Alan's part of the business, the TSG officers. I attended a Gold meeting last Friday actually in Ballymoney in relation to the operation about this, and I want to reassure you that it's a multifaceted operation. So there has been additional patrolling. We have thorough investigations into the various incidents that have happened, and we are looking at the names of specific individuals who we suspect are involved in the UDA in North Antrim. We're seeking to develop our intelligence work, and there is community engagement and looking at community issues amongst other things. You know, the actions of this UDA group, and endorse and just echo what the Chief Constable said, the strength of his comments, they're unacceptable. And we will work very hard to catch them and place them before the court. I did note that in yesterday's article, the so-called spokesman referred to police and loyalist relationships being in a bad place an old time ago. I want to say that there is new commanders up there and some of the existing commanders, and we have always been prepared to talk with and work with bona fide community representatives in loyalist, Republican, nationalist, unionist areas right across the board, and we will continue to do that. And I would just urge anyone with influence in the North Antrim area to try and get the loyalists who are involved in this to see sense and stop. But I would also make an appeal to people who live up in that area or elsewhere, if they have any information around who's involved in this, what they're doing, please bring it forward. But we're determined. You know, we will stick at this, and we will do our absolute best to place people before the courts.
Chair, Chief will be aware that my colleague John Dowd in particular has been highlighting the difficulties in that area and the concerns and the apparent reticence of the PSNI to tackle some of these, because we aren't seeing product in terms of people brought before the court, and some of them are well known alleged offenders. So how can we and others provide reassurance to people within the community they will be protected and that they have the assistance from the police, that we're not worrying about the relationship between some, because we know some of this is only a front, in terms of relationship, and people hide behind the brand of the UDA, if you like, to engage in their criminal activity to allow to go on. So I do think it needs to be a very strong message, and hopefully work done with the new PCSP and actually enabling people with information to come forward and feel protected in doing so.
Yeah, well, I would reassure you there has been search activity, which Mr. Dahl will have seen. There have been arrests in relation to this activity. Yes, we're still wish to place people before the court. But as I've said, again, on a number of occasions, McGalvery Prison is full of people who we've placed before the court and have been convicted. And we want to see the people who are doing this placed before the court and convicted. That's our determination, and we will do this. Of course, we would much rather they just stop doing what they do. We don't want to see any more victims, so we're seeking to do everything we can to try and prevent it. But when it does occur, we will do everything we can to investigate it and place it before the court.
Yeah, thanks very much, Chair. And first of all, Steve, thank you for your answer. I agree with really everything you're saying wholeheartedly. Obviously, we wanted on the record as a political representative in the area, I really condemn actions of this small number of people. They don't reflect the views of anybody in Northampton. They are in no way supported by the people of Northampton. They're viewed largely as parasites, and certainly we want to see them dealt with as quickly and as swiftly as possible. Dolores, I think, made a really good point in her first statement. She said that it was organised criminality, and I believe, from what I'm hearing in the area, that we are to a lesser extent motivated by power, but to a greater extent motivated by money. And there is an illegal substance trade there, and there is an illicit goods trade, whether it's fraudulent cigarettes or whatever, which is largely fueling their insatiable appetite for money and this criminal behaviour. So therefore, in that context, I would like to ask, perhaps this might veer slightly into Will's territory as well, is there any intention at this stage to involve the National Crime Agency in trying to deal with these individuals, to see, in a context where obviously resources are tight within the PSNI's budget to do such things? We do now obviously have the legislation in place after some time, albeit but it is not there, that perhaps that resource could be brought in. I think it would give tremendous comfort to the people of Northampton to know that there are additional resources being brought in to try and root this cancer out of our society.
Well, I'll let Will talk about the National Crime Agency, but I can reassure you that the Gould meeting I was at last week, there was the Detective Superintendent from Crime Operations Department present in the room attending the Gould meeting, and we will be wide-ranging in how we investigate these individual crimes, but these people, and every aspect of their criminality.
Thank you. The short answer is yes. We will be using all the additional capability of the National Crime Agency to tackle what is largely an organised crime group up there. They're involved in the same range of commodities that other OCGs are involved in, whether drugs, dealing with people and people's vulnerabilities, and a range of other crime types. And this group's no different. We just have to hold it under a very convenient guise, try and give them some legitimacy that these members don't have. But we bring every tool that we have to the table to tackle them, and the NCA will be one of those tools.
Chair, just on that, Wes, we will use whatever is in the toolbox, including the NCA. We shouldn't underestimate the capacity and capability of PSNI. Raymond Murray is the Chief Superintendent leading this. He's an outstanding police leader. He has got a breadth and depth of experience in locking up really bad people for a really long time. I have 100% confidence in him. He will be like a dog with a bone against the UDA and anybody else that's breaking the law in North East London.
Thank you. Final question or two questions from you, John?
Thank you, Chair. First of all, Chief, this really is an issue of public perception.
speech that was made, or sectarian speech, whichever way you want to look at it, it was a combination of both. And we all were able to see on YouTube, we talked about cybercrime earlier. I would have to ask the question, what did and what actions were carried out by the police around the investigation of that? Because ultimately there was no convictions or attempts made to take that to court to the Public Prosecution Service. And it stands in stark contrast to what happened to young Conway Floyd Allen, who played what was, seen as an inappropriate tune outside the chapel. And they were convicted for that, And I think the interesting thing there was Sir Declan Morgan actually commenting on the fact that things like this here do create a perception that there's an inequality in our justice system and less dealing with things. From your point of view, Chief, what actions did the police take? Were the individuals in the Druid Balance question? The guy who was quite clearly seen on video, was he questioned? I know you maintained you didn't get enough evidence to prosecute them, but what actions were actually taken to help try and bring prosecution out?
Stephen, do you want to take that, or are we going to be done in your view?
Yeah, okay. I think it's important to note at the outset, Jonathan, that the police are one part of the criminal justice system. We don't decide on prosecutions, and we do not determine guilt or innocence. The PPS decide whether the test for prosecution is met, and the courts determine the person's guilt or innocence. Our job is to investigate alleged offences. And if we receive a complaint, we will examine it to see if there are reasonable grounds to suspect an offence. And if there are reasonable grounds to suspect an offence has been committed, we'll investigate it thoroughly and exercise powers of arrest, of interview, of search, etc., as are appropriate in the circumstances. We cannot exercise these powers if the reasonable grounds threshold is not met. We can only operate within our own legal powers. And once our investigation is completed, we will submit a file to the PPS, who will decide if the test for prosecution is met. And of course, that's the basis of our criminal justice system. In relation to the Druids case specifically, there was early discussion between ourselves and the PPS, and we agreed that while it's very distasteful, very unsavoury, the circumstances didn't amount to a reasonable suspicion of an offence under Article 9 of the Public Order, Northern Ireland Order 1987, that's stirring up hatred, arousing fear. And whenever you believe that arrive at a situation that is not reasonable grounds to suspect, that means that you don't have actually any grounds to interview or to caution or to arrest. Now, nevertheless, a file of the known circumstances was submitted to allow the PPS to make a final decision. On a more general point, there is no specific hate crime in Northern Ireland. There are various offences by different scenarios. The motivation of a person in committing an act is relevant in some cases and not relevant in others. Public order law is very context specific. Actions that may incur criminal liability in one context will not incur it in another. So, for example, a key element in relation to hate speech is whether hatred is likely to be stirred up. There is not always a clear dividing line between offences. Some require intent and others do not. Making the same statement in different contexts could have different legal consequences. In the House of Lords in 2001, Lord Steen said, in law, context is everything. And of course, the right to freedom of expression under Article 10 of the European Convention of Human Rights, which also protects views which cause shock or offence, must always be considered. The fact that someone might be offended by something does not necessarily make it illegal. Parades and protests have long posed challenges to the police and wider society. These issues are not new. One of the leading cases regarding a breach of the peace, for example, concerned a person grabbing an orange lily from another in Calvin in 1864. The growth of the internet and social media means views that can be shared with the world, almost the entire world instantly, with all the positive and negative consequences that this brings. Constant flows of complaints and allegations has a negative effect on public discourse and can undermine confidence in the police. I want to reassure you that the police are absolutely and totally impartial in these issues. We focus solely on keeping people safe and complying with our legal obligations. We cannot act outside the law that is created by legislators. And I believe that recent police actions clearly demonstrate this impartiality. And if you look at, for example, Twitter feeds and other social media, you will often see elements from both sides of our community accused us of being biased against them. I would ask, obviously I recognise the context of your question, and we are approaching the heart of the parade season, and I would just ask that people, particularly people in elected positions and responsible positions in civic society, just to exercise real responsibility, and not only in their actions, but in their words.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Stephen, I was looking at it with deep interest because I think what comes to the root of this is who made the decision and why was the decision made that this did not stir up public hate. Because I don't think you'll find anyone who will say that that speech did not stir up public hate. Because it quite clearly was targeted at two groups. One was the British Army, and the other one was an organisation I belong to, the Orange Order. But it was quite clearly hateful comments made towards them, which could stir up public reaction against it. So why was the decision made not to follow it up? Because I'm presuming from the answer you gave there that the individual in question or the individuals were not even questioned about this.
No, that's right. Legal advice was taken at the time from our own lawyers. We consulted and took pre-prosecutorial advice from the PPS, and both our own lawyers and our own professional judgment coalesced with the PPS's view. And the offence of stirring up hatred and arousing fear requires intent, and you need to demonstrate that evidence of hate has been stirred up. It's a high threshold, and the view was taken by both the PSNI and the PPS, and they still hold that view, that the offence, that specific offence, there was not reasonable grounds to suspect that offence has been treated as distasteful and unsavoury and intolerable and inappropriate. The words were, did not breach the law.
There is something, there's a broader societal, if not political issue. We accept at a human values level that this was distasteful, that it was inappropriate. The values side of this team doesn't like it, but it didn't meet the legal threshold. We don't write the law, the legislators do. If the Assembly were so minded to lower the threshold, as it's happened in Scotland, we'd be very happy to implement the law, but we can't operate outside the law, even if it's against behaviour that we find distasteful or inappropriate. We have to operate within the law. Otherwise, we would be liable for wrongful arrest and malicious prosecution and all the rest of it. We're not going to go to that place.
Thanks, Chair. We've got to hear on a completely different issue, the utilisation of part-time police officers. And it was interesting earlier to hear, Chief, that there is very clear restrictions on the duties of part-time police officers. And given, I think what we all witnessed and were horrified about in Londonderry earlier this week, were an explosive device went off. And from the video that was clearly shown on the news, an individual, literally by seconds, by literally seconds, missed being, seriously injured or killed by that device. Can the part-time officers, under those circumstances, aid existing officers? And more importantly, what is the risk level from dissonant activity, and more importantly, I suppose, from any terrorist activity in Northern Ireland at this point in time?
I cover off initially on the review that we're undergoing at the moment in the use of part-time reserve officers. Unfortunately, I can't reference reference events in County Cavan in 1864, but I didn't have to reference the 2004 PSNI part-time reserve regulations. It's in that context then that we are looking at the deployment of police officers, our part-time reserve officers, and primarily we're asking them to undertake three things which we think are very important. And this is centered around visible uniform policing. Undertake duties in support of policing the nighttime economy, undertake duties to support surge activity and the management of major incidents, and undertake duties at parades, public and other major events which require policing input. Now, what we want to get to is part-time reserve officers who we know we can call upon and detail the duties where we want visible presence on the ground. They're a body that we've invested in terms of training and equipment, and we continue to invest in them. And it's only appropriate then that we get the best value from them in terms of visibility and visible deployments. But the regulations under which we work meet certain demands of them in terms of the hours they work per annum, and we're having a review of the hours that part-time reserve officers have worked over the last year. And that's in order to be sure that we have a group of people that we can call upon and we can detail them in respect of the duty types or the duty categories that I've outlined. But if you even undertake duty support of policing the nighttime economy, that's 3 to 4 nights every week that we need them in terms of the duties. So it is a change in emphasis for some of them, but I think it's a change that we want to really make sure that we're making the best use of them. They're part of the human resource we have available to us, and in times of reducing headcount, reducing finance, where we get every good value for money out of them and the duties that they do. I'll pass over to Will around the threat.
In short, Jonathan, yeah, the threat remains severe from violent distant Republican groupings who still retain the intent and capability to go out and cause significant damage and still are intending to try and kill people, as we've seen in recent attacks. We've applied significant disruption to these groups over the last 18 to 24 months. The Chief's referenced that in some public commentary. He's made recently through arrests, seizures and other forms of disruption. That's impacted significantly morale, the confidence and capability and resources of these listening groups, but they remain dangerous. And the last 2 attacks have highlighted 2 things. Firstly, just how dangerous they are, and secondly, just how reckless they are. These groups have no concern about community confidence, community support, or community elements. They just don't care. And whilst it's important to keep some perspective around these groups, I mean, these are small, unrepresentative groups of backward-looking people who just aren't interested in things that most other people are interested in. They do remain dangerous. They're not likely to go away anytime soon, but we remain absolutely committed and we're investing significant resources to keep communities and our officers safe from the intentions of these groups.
Thank you all very much. That concludes our business today. Just a reminder that we don't have a May meeting. This was actually the May meeting. There's an important event happening next week, some of my colleagues tell me. But our next meeting will be the first Thursday in June. So thank you all very much for your time and attention.